Welcome to the Sports Moment, your ticket to the Summer Olympics. It's Monday, July 29th, and I'm your host, Ava Wallace, a sports reporter here in Paris covering the Summer Games. Today, I'm joined by the Post's NBA reporter, Ben Golliver. Hey, Ben.
Hi, Ava. How's it going?
So you are in northern France in a place called Lille, where the basketball tournament is taking place currently, and that's very close to Belgium, yeah? Did you get to explore around there?
Oh, that's right. Lille is the biggest city in northern France, but it's right by the Belgian border. And I was fascinated to find out the border, it's not really a border at all. You could just take an Uber right across. You don't have to show a passport. Nobody stamps it. The only thing that changes are the French flags in the train station to the Belgian flags in the next train station. So it was a nice couple of days getting acclimated up there, but now it's just all about being in the gym. They're running basically 4 games a day, every day for more than a week to try to narrow the 12-team fields in these basketball tournaments down to 8 so they can head back to Paris and have the quarterfinals, semifinals, and medal round next week.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm glad you got to do some exploring beforehand because I know those are long days in the gym and you could be anywhere in the world once the game starts. But thank you also for pointing out that the basketball will actually move to Paris eventually when the quarterfinals begin. I am really excited to be talking about men's basketball because yesterday was the United States' first game. They beat Serbia. We're going to break down their performance later in the show, but before we get there, I want to step back for people who might not be aware of kind of their legacy at the Olympics. Ben, what's their reputation at the Olympic Games?
I would say dominance, celebrity, cool. I mean, I think a lot of people would associate this program with the 1992 Dream Team. That was Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, and Magic Johnson just taking over Barcelona and really spreading the game on a global level, hooking a whole generation of basketball fans and inspiring all of these countries that are now major competitors of the USA basketball in these international tournaments. I think this current version bears a lot of similarities to some of the best USA basketball teams of all time. You're looking at major star power with LeBron James, Stephen Curry, Kevin Durant. These are household names, global names, huge followings on social media. And you put all those guys together on the same team, it's an exciting product. I mean, they can put up points in a hurry. They can play great, hard-nosed defense when they want to or when they're locked in anyways. And it's kind of a traveling road show. I mean, they've been staying in these 5-star hotels, both in Paris and Lille up here in northern France. And there's been fans crowded around the hotel entrance, desperate to get a selfie, desperate to get a picture. At their first game, you had all sorts of signs saying, "LeBron, please let me have your sneakers." I mean, this is sort of the mania factor that has followed this program for decades. And of course, the stakes here are obvious. They've won 4 straight gold medals going back to 2008. And it's really a gold or bust reality. And that might not even be strong enough. I mean, it's gold or disaster. Yeah. Anytime these guys lose, everyone rips their hair out domestically and wonders what's wrong with American basketball. And I think players like LeBron and Kevin Durant and Steph Curry decided to team up because they want to prove a point that America is still on top and this is the best country when it comes to the hardwood.
I'm glad you mentioned the cool factor, too, and the fact that this team is staying in Paris and training up to Lille for games. Is that right?
That's right. They have an amazing logistical setup here because of their celebrity, right? So they essentially booked out an entire hotel in the city center of Paris at the cost, most likely, of millions of dollars. They have hundreds of rooms for the players, their families, support staff, obviously the women's team as well. For these early round games up in Lille, which is about an hour's train ride north of Paris, they're taking private trains up the night before, sort of like a road trip in the NBA or the WNBA. They're staying at another 5-star hotel up in Lille, which they've completely booked out. Immediately after the game, they are then taking the private train back to Paris because they obviously want to maximize their time in Paris. Sure. Now, for the poor writers, we get stuck up here in Lille, which actually is not that bad at all, but it's not exactly the city of lights. You could understand why guys who are making tens of millions of dollars might want to have a good time after a big victory down there in Paris.
I was going to say LeBron James agrees to come back and play the Olympics. He's going to say, I want to stay in Paris, though. I want to make sure I stay in Paris. But okay, so on the global stage the past couple of years, there has been a little bit of concern, and you mentioned these kind of big NBA stars coming back to this international team and saying, no, we have to reassert our dominance over the rest of the world. What's happened the past couple of tournaments that gave everybody a fright?
Well, if you go back to Tokyo, LeBron James didn't play, Steph Curry didn't play, and it was kind of Kevin Durant's team. And he happened to get in foul trouble in the first game in Tokyo, and they wound up losing to France. And everyone was looking around saying, wait a minute, if they lose their first game, does that mean they're not going to medal? Like, what's going on here? Is this going to be this international disgrace? And as it turned out, they didn't lose again. Kevin Durant played the hero role and they got the gold, and everybody was really happy by the end of it. But in recent FIBA World Cup tournaments, which is sort of like the second most important tournament, the USA men have really struggled. They've taken younger teams, typically players who are under 25 years old. Anthony Edwards, former number one pick who plays for the Minnesota Timberwolves, was one of the leading stars of last year's FIBA World Cup team. And in each of the last two tournaments, for that FIBA World Cup, they haven't medaled, and they've lost in somewhat embarrassing fashion.
And I should say that FIBA, that's just the international governing body of basketball. It's kind of the same thing that FIFA is for soccer, but the World Cup, not as kind of glitzy or as glamorous as the Olympics, but it still is an important proving ground on the world stage. And like you said, it's where kind of Team USA sends a lot of its younger players and said, here, get some international experience so that when you do go to the Olympics, you kind of know what you're doing and know how to be a leader as well.
That's right. And the narrative that has developed is this idea that, sure, American players are talented, but because they get thrown together on these international teams without really having much shared experience, they don't have the chemistry, and maybe they're not unselfish enough to be able to play winning basketball. And so I think not only are they here to wow everybody, to give them a great show, I think they're here to prove that American basketball players are unselfish, they are team-oriented, and they're able to, sacrifice some ego, sacrifice some touches and some shots for the good of the group.
It is worth mentioning that at the Olympics, at least, the U.S. has been here before, and that's at the 2008 Summer Olympics. They were the so-called Redeem Team, which was after the U.S. had suffered the absolute embarrassment of winning only bronze in the 2004 Games in Athens. They were trying to redeem themselves in Beijing. They did win the gold then. So I know there's not officially a name for this roster, which I think is actually very lame. Like, we gotta get a name for these guys, but it feels like we're having another kind of Redeem Team moment, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's funny because it's the old guys who are coming back to do it again. I mean, like LeBron James was actually on the Redeem Team. And I think that, he's looking for sort of a last dance opportunity here. This is the first chance that he and Kevin Durant and Steph Curry have had to play together on the same team. Steph Curry's never played in the Olympics, so it's actually his opportunity to win his first gold medal and maybe to kind of secure his legacy.
I always forget that Steph hasn't played in the Olympics. And on LeBron being old, my favorite moment of the opening ceremonies broadcast was when LeBron, obviously the flag bearer for Team USA, alongside Coco Gauff. Coco Gauff, who's 20 or 21, I think, and LeBron James, obviously 30. Is he 38, Ben?
He's 39, turning 40 in December. Yeah, so he's almost as old as yours truly.
She called him Mr. LeBron James, like she was referring to an elder. She was like, I'm standing here with Mr. LeBron James. I was like, oh my God, Coco.
It raises an important generational point, though, which is a lot of the very best players in the NBA right now, the recent MVP winners are international players, or the guys who, like for Luka Doncic, for example, hasn't won an MVP, but he did go to the finals this year. He's kind of a centerpiece player. You have him. You have Serbia's Nikola Jokic. You've got Giannis Antetokounmpo, who plays for Greece. And that's why USA Basketball turned to the old guard, led by LeBron James, because their younger players are very, very talented, but they're not quite on that absolute elite peak level. And I think that this USA Basketball team would look very different without LeBron, who's kind of installed himself as a point forward, the lead ball handler. Kevin Durant had been injured throughout their run-up to the Olympics. He shows up in the first game and he hits his first 8 shots in the first half, and he leads all scorers with 23 points. Steph Curry's had some remarkable moments as they've been getting ready for the Olympics as well. So these guys might be old, but don't push them over the hill just yet, Ava.
Okay, so you're talking about all these guys who've kind of come back to take USA Basketball back to glory, whatever that means. But there have been some stumbles so far already.
Yeah, well, they played 5 exhibition games leading up to the Olympics. They actually did a great job of scheduling their opponents. It was going to be teams they would face in the Olympics, so it's kind of a chance to feel out the opposition, get a sense for who you're going to be playing when the games actually matter. And in 3 of those exhibitions, they were way too close for comfort, at least by USA basketball standards, whether it was Australia, South Sudan, or Germany. All those games kind of came down to the last minute where, they're eking these games out. Against South Sudan, LeBron James had to make a game winner with less than 15 seconds left for them to beat a country that is playing in its first Olympics this year, that has really only played in one major international tournament before, that doesn't have any current NBA players on their roster. And that wasn't even a country about 15 years ago because they were going through an extended civil war. So for the USA to be pushed to the brink by a team like that, it was definitely a cause for concern. And the recurring issues were, matters of chemistry, lots of turnovers. And that's what Steve Kerr, the coach, has really been trying to do, is bring this group of individual stars together to get them to play a little bit, less rough around the edges.
You mentioned issues of chemistry and everything like that. Even with that being the case, if you can't take a bunch of the best players in the NBA and throw them together no matter what and still beat these countries who don't have as much of a basketball tradition as the US does that say more about where the US program is now or where the rest of the world is catching up to us?
Well, if I'd say I'm a hard liner, I say no excuses. I mean, USA needs to win this tournament, okay? But the common narrative that you've heard, and it's really developed over the last 10 years or so, there's no doubt that every Olympics that takes place is the best tournament in terms of total quality, in terms of total number of teams that have NBA caliber players on them that we've ever seen. And it just continues to unfold like that. So, for example, Canada, practically their entire roster is made up of NBA players. That's not something we could really ever say about any team besides the United States. You look at France with Victor Wembanyama. He had a sensational debut in his first game with the national team. If you fast forward to the Los Angeles Olympics in 2028, it's very possible he will be the best player in the world at that point. I mean, it says a lot about how far this sport has come in the last 20 to 30 years.
Okay, after the break, we're going to get more into how the U.S. performed against Serbia in that game you watched on Sunday. Okay, so Ben, a quick glance at Serbia's roster. Obviously, Nikola Jokic is on there. You see a couple of other guys who play in the NBA who are familiar to me, at least. But how good overall is Serbia's team?
Well, they're definitely a medal threat. They actually finished second in last year's FIBA World Cup tournament, and Nikola Jokic, their best player who kind of does everything for them, didn't even play in that tournament. So that tells you about their toughness and their resilience, their togetherness, and just their general talent. I mean, Serbia has a long history of excellent basketball. They're very well coached. And so it was an incredibly impressive victory by the United States on Sunday. I mean, they won going away in blowout fashion. And the reason why it's so important, this is a 12-team tournament. They split them into 3 groups. And so you really want to finish in the top 2 among your group. And in the United States' group, the only other team that's really viewed as a medal contender is Serbia. So by beating Serbia and by doing it in kind of dominant fashion, they've really taken control of this group and they've set themselves up kind of on the fast track towards the quarterfinals. They're going to have 2 more of these opening round games against South Sudan and Puerto Rico. Both of those teams are ranked outside the top 15 in the world basketball rankings. And so, you obviously you don't want to take your foot off the gas if you're USA basketball, but you're definitely breathing a sigh of relief because you don't have to deal with all the questions about existential issues. Oh my gosh, they lost to Serbia in the opening game. You don't have to deal with any of that kind of talk. You've got your toughest test already behind you when it comes to this group stage.
I watched the game in the main media center here in Paris and saw that Kevin Durant was coming off the bench. Obviously, you have to, when you have that many NBA stars, you got to balance them somehow. But he had such a fun game and it was just doing classic Kevin Durant things. Ended, like you said, with 23 points to lead all scorers. Do you think he'll be coming off the bench next game?
Well, it's unclear because he didn't play at all during the 5 exhibition games, and he actually did not participate in training camp. And it was because he had suffered a calf injury, I guess a minor one, right before they got together this summer, to get ready for this Olympic run-up. And so his status was quote-unquote day-to-day for more than 3 weeks. And when you go all the way back to the first day of training camp, he was sitting in the corner by himself with his hood pulled over his head. It looked like he was in a self-imposed detention. You could just tell he was upset and sad that he couldn't kind of participate with this group because he's a USA basketball lifer. He's actually in position, if USA wins gold, to be the first men's basketball player ever to win 4 gold medals. And so there's obviously huge stakes, and that's why he wouldn't want to back out because of a health concern. So what they did was they brought him along very slowly. They did not play him at all during the exhibition games. They made sure he got some scrimmage action against his teammates before he actually played against Serbia. And then once they did play him, like you mentioned, they brought him in off the bench and they really limited his minutes. I think he only played 17 minutes, which is far less than he would play like in a gold medal game, for example. I would expect them to kind of continue this ramp up, but let's be honest. I mean, when you've got LeBron James, Steph Curry, and Kevin Durant, those 3 guys should be in the starting lineup, if at all possible, right? I mean, those are some of the biggest names in the entire Olympics, and you don't want those guys coming off the bench.
And I do understand that you've got to balance minutes and everything here. I was a little bit surprised to see Jason Tatum, who, of course, leads the NBA championship winning Boston Celtics. They just won this year's title. And Tyrese Halliburton, who's a huge star in the playoffs this year for the Indiana Pacers, didn't play at all. Did Steve Kerr say anything about that?
Yeah, he did. He was almost sheepish. He's like, I know it seems crazy not to play Jason Tatum.
It does seem crazy.
It is crazy. I mean, he was a first-team All-NBA selection the last 3 years. He is coming straight off of this championship run. He just happens to play the same position as Kevin Durant. And I think, honestly, KD on the international level is just a better player. He has so much experience. His quick shooting, I mean, he just looks like he could hit from anywhere in that first game. And so apparently it was prescribed by Steve Kerr. He had told Jason Tatum this was the plan. Even when it got to be garbage time, when the U.S. was up by 20 points late in the fourth quarter, he didn't put Jason Tatum in kind of out of respect, just to let him know, hey, we're not just trying to use you in mop-up duty. But Kerr did say it's just tricky to play all 12 players in a short 40-minute game, and that he is going to continue to tinker with his rotation, make sure guys get opportunities as they go forward. Like I mentioned, the schedule lightens up a little bit here against South Sudan and Puerto Rico. There should be some opportunities to play the guys who didn't get a play against Serbia and to really let them get a taste of the Olympic action.
Okay, so rough road through the exhibitions, and they come out and have this performance with Jason Tatum in their back pocket, by the way, who didn't even play. Do you feel like the exhibitions did their job then? Have all the kinks kind of been worked out on this roster?
Well, totally. And part of the exhibition challenge was that they flew from Las Vegas to Abu Dhabi to London and then took a train to Paris. So that make sense. I mean, obviously there's, probably some financial reasons why they stopped off in Abu Dhabi, right? It's not exactly the most efficient travel schedule, but I'm sure that kind of threw guys off in terms of their readiness to play when you're changing that many time zones and just kind of continent hopping, right? But now they can sort of bunker down, spend most of their time in Paris. They've bonded together. There's a lot of goodwill between these players. LeBron and Steph Curry especially have never really been on the same team ever, but they've been kind of friendly, or they've known each other for almost 20 years. So you can just see these guys laughing before, during, and after games together in a way that we really never saw, especially when they were big-time rivals on the Cleveland Cavaliers and Golden State Warriors, about 10 years ago. So I think those kinds of good vibes are going to continue for this group, and obviously they're going to need to finish the job.
So, Ben, as you know from covering the Tokyo Games, that there are always these kind of like weird little moments that don't make it into our reporting that happen during the Olympics. I'm wondering if you've had a funny interaction or anything kind of off-kilter happen to you since arriving in Paris.
Well, I'm glad you asked, because I tried to get up to Lille a little bit early just to familiarize myself with that area, because I'd never been up there. So the first thing I did was hit my hotel app. I found a nice looking hotel, and I thought, oh, this is going to be great. It's a good price, perfect. I get up there, and all of a sudden in the lobby, it's just overwhelming Americana. I'm seeing American flags, the stars and stripes. I'm seeing bunting. I'm seeing a 10-foot basketball hoop basically in the lobby. I'm seeing USA basketball jerseys framed on the wall, and I'm starting to think, I don't believe they did all this for me. This might actually be where USA basketball, the team, is planning to stay when they're up here. And sure enough, the hotel staff explained it to me that the USA had booked out the hotel for a certain amount of time to cover when they're playing in these group stage games in the first round of the tournament. And right when I was checking out, or getting ready to check out, the front desk guy let me know. He's like, you got to be out by noon because these guys are coming through. So you don't have to go home, but you got to get out of here.
Ben Golliver, thank you so much for coming on today's episode. That was a really good place to leave it.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Ben Golliver covers the NBA for The Post. He will also be writing about the Team USA women at these Olympic Games, and for those of you who are looking for information about that, don't worry, I'm all in on it. I just wanted to separate out these conversations of the men's and women's program because there is so much history. There are so many exciting athletes to talk about. So look out for an episode on the Team USA women coming in your feeds later during the games. Before we go, here are a couple of events worth checking out today. And just to note, all of these times are in Eastern Time. At 2:30 p.m., the women's 400-meter individual medley is taking place over at the pool, and that is going to feature the recent silver medalist, Summer McIntosh. And the U.S. women's basketball team opens their group play against the reigning Olympic silver medalist, Japan, at 3 p.m. That's it for today on The Sports Moment. If you want more up-to-date information about the latest news from Paris, you should also subscribe to my newsletter, which is also called The Sports Moment. You can find a link to that newsletter in our show notes. Today's episode was produced and mixed by Ted Muldoon. It was edited by Joe Tone. Special thanks to Jerry Brewer for giving Ted a crash course in basketball. I'm Ava Wallace. Until next time from Paris.